Enjoy Designs, and welcome back to the Crochet Magical Mystery Tour. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to make the ruched scarf. And these two scarves may look the same at first glance, but when we take a look at them up close, one is made in Tunisian crochet, simple stitch, and the other one is made in regular crochet, in single crochet. This is the 19th pattern of the Crochet Magical Mystery Tour, which is a year-long crochet along where I teach you a new pattern each week along with a free downloadable PDF. The link to joining that is in the description below. In part one, I'm going to teach you how to make this scarf in Tunisian crochet, and in part two, that's this one here, and in part two I'm going to teach you how to make it in regular crochet. For this pattern, we are going to need a yarn needle, a measuring tape, scissors, some yarn. I'm using a number 3 weight yarn called Baby Bee Baby Lulu in the color lilac. This is available at Hobby Lobby. And then another yarn that would work well for this is Yarn Bee Delish Boutique, which is also a number 3 yarn. And then for both the regular crochet and the Tunisian crochet, we're using a 9mm crochet hook. And you can use, if you're making this as a scarf as opposed to a wrap or a shawl, you can use a regular crochet hook even for the Tunisian crochet. You'll just need to put a rubber band on the end. Or you can use a Tunisian crochet hook, and I use the Denise set, and I'll have a link to that in the description below and in the pattern. These are awesome. They're adjustable or interchangeable, where you have a bunch of these different kind of ends to make them longer or shorter, and they're just really cool. So if you have a moment before we get started to give this video a thumbs up if you like free videos, that helps me out a lot. Thank you. For this pattern, we are going to be working our scarf like this, back and forth in this way. So for both the part 1 in Tunisian crochet and part 2 in regular crochet, if you're making it as a scarf, we're going to work with 25 stitches, and that's going to give you a scarf that is approximately 10 inches wide. So this portion here is going to be 10 inches wide, and this is 25 stitches to start. Now you'll be able to work this scarf as many rows as you would like to make it as long or as short as you like. If you want this pattern to be a wrap, you can start with a wider amount and work back and forth. Or you also have the option for either, well, probably would only work well for the excuse me, for the wrap. You could start with a very long starting edge and work back and forth this way. So for these, your ruche sections are going to be like this. And the same with if you do it as a wrap. This is what I'm referring to as the ruched sections, these where you have these ripples. And if you work it this way, your ruched sections are going to be lengthwise, and so on. For the crochet version of this shawl, I did the same thing that I did with the Tunisian version, which is I worked the first panel as a flat panel and then worked the ruched panel, flat panel, ruched panel, and so on. And then I ended on a ruched panel. So I have two different types of endings or edges, so I can style it, in two different ways. So you can choose to either begin on a flat panel like me, which is how I'm going to teach this tutorial, and the instructions will also tell you how to start with a ruched panel. Or you can start with the ruched panel or the flat panel. You can end on a flat panel. You can do it whatever combination you want. So that's completely up to you. If you are going to start with a flat panel for the crochet version, you are going to chain 26. If you want to start with a ruched panel, you are going to start with a chain of 49. If you want your shawl to be, if you want your scarf to be wider, or if you're going to make it into a wrap and you want to start with a flat panel, you can start with you can actually start with any number, odd or even, that you like. If you start with a ruched panel, you need to start with an odd number of chains. And of course, if you want to make it as a wrap, either working this way or working this way, you can adjust your starting chain to whatever length you want. If you're going to start with a flat panel, start with a length of chain that you want your shawl or your wrap to be. And if you're working this way, you're going to start with a chain of how high how high or deep you want your wrap or shawl to be. If you want to start these with a ruched edge, then what you're going to do is you're going to want your starting chain to be double the length that you want your shawl to be. And the same for this measurement here. If you want to start with a ruched edge, you're going to chain an amount that is double the length that you want this side to be. If you're going to start your panel with a ruched panel, you're going to start with 49 chains. And what you'll do is just start the project the same way that I'm going to teach how to start the project as a flat panel. Then what you'll do is skip ahead in the video to where I go from a ruched panel to a flat panel. And I'll have a label on the screen for you to look for that. Essentially what you're doing is, if this is your first stitch and this is your last stitch, and these are all your stitches in between, when you go from a ruched panel to a flat panel, you're going to work the first and the last stitch as just as single, and then for every other combination of stitches you're going to stitch them together. And that's why you need to start with an odd number, because we start in the second chain from the hook with our first stitch. So that's going to give you, this will end up giving you 48 single crochets in your first row. So this is your row 1 of the ruched panel, and then your row, this is your this is your row 5. This is your row 5 of the ruched panel here, and then this is your row 1 of the flat panel, and then row 2 is like this, where each of these lines represent a single crochet. Okay, so let me show you a little diagram of how this works if you're starting with a flat panel versus starting with a ruched panel. With a flat panel, you are going to have any number, you can start with any number of chains, and whatever number of chains you have, you will end up with one less of single crochets. So in our case, we're starting with a chain 26, and that's going to give us 25 single crochets. So for this diagram, this is our row 1 of a flat panel. And you just work 5 of these rows, single crochet all the way across, row 3, 4, 5. Each time you're just going into the same stitch. So it's the same thing every row, single crochet all the way across. When we get here and we switch to a ruched panel, the first stitch and the last stitch are going to be single crochets, individual single crochets, and then all the stitches in the middle will get 2 single crochets into each of those stitches. So that's going to be your row 1 of a ruched panel. Row 2 is going to be single crochet into each single crochet across. So your number doubles -2. And you just continue row 2 for 3 more, for a total of, so that you have 5 rows all together. You repeat row 2 3 times. And when you're here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. When you switched back to a flat panel, and for those of you that start with a ruched panel, this is what you'll do when you go to transition to a flat panel. Your first stitch and your last stitch are always individual single crochets, but the ones in the middle, you're going to do 2 single crochets together. Single crochet 2 together. And that brings you back down to the same number of stitches that you started with. In our case, it's going to be 25. So that's going to be your row 1, and then row 2 is going to be single crocheting. This decreases and becomes 1 stitch, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So you're going to work just single crochet into each of those stitches then across. And you just, you continue that each row. And then when you get to the row 5, then you come and you begin your ruched panel again. So if you are beginning with a ruched panel, you are going to start just with a larger number. And you're going to start with any odd number. In this case, if you want to follow the same size that I made, you would chain 49 so that you'll end up with 48 single crochets. And then this way, let's say, so the only difference is your first row, if you're starting with a ruched panel, is just going to start with 48 single crochets, and then you'll transition into the flat panel and just alternate between the panels. And then of course you can end on either a flat panel or a ruched panel, completely up to you. So if you're starting with a ruched panel, you're just going to have way more stitches to begin with. You'll have the 48, you're going to start with a chain of 49, and that'll be your row 1. And then when you get to your row 5, you will be, when you then go into the flat panel, you'll be decreasing those stitches together. This is your row 2, row 1, and so on. You work all the way up to row 5. So just like the Tunisian version, we're going to start with 25 stitches. So we're going to start with a slip knot and put that on the end of our hook. And we're going to start with a chain, in this case, of 26. And a chain is yarn over, pull through the loop on your hook, yarn over, pull through the loop on your hook. So just do that for 26 times, unless you've chosen a different number for yourself. Okay, so we have 26 chains, and what we're going to do is we're going to single crochet into the second chain from our hook. And just like with the Tunisian version, we're going to work into the back bump to make the nicest bottom edge. So in the front we have these V's, the front of the chains, and in the back we have what's referred to as the back bump. So we're going to work into the back bump of the second chain. So here's the first one, and here's the second one. We're going to go into that back bump, tighten up this loop so that it's just snug, and we're going to work a single crochet. So once we go in, we yarn over, pull through a loop. We have 2 loops on our hook, yarn over, pull through 2. So that's the first one. Then we go to the second one. We go to the next back bump. Yarn over, pull through a loop, yarn over, pull through 2 loops. And these stitches are going to be loose because we are working with a large hook for this size yarn. You're just going to do this all the way down to the very last one, and when you get to the end you should have a total of 25 single crochets. So I just worked into the last chain, and I have 25 chains all together. That's our first row completed. So what we're going to do now is we're going to chain 1 and turn our work to the other side. And the way that I like to crochet, there's a couple of different ways. You can either some methods have you going into the second stitch and then also working into the turning chain from the end, but I like to work into the first stitch, the very first stitch, and I think it gives a nicer effect. So we're going to go right into this very first stitch and do a single crochet. You can see where the opening is. You can see the V's on top. You just go right under those 2 threads. I make sure this loop is not overly loose. Yarn over. I have 2 loops on my hook, and yarn over, pull through 2. And that's single crochet completed. And then you're just going to continue that all the way to the very end. All the way to this last stitch here, and you can see those 2 threads on top. Sometimes the last stitch is a little harder to see, but that's it right there. Okay, and if you want to count them as you go, you should have 25. I'll meet you at the end. So I just completed row 2, and I just want to show you what that looks like when you, so that you're able to, like in the Tunisian, so that you're able to determine what row you're on. So because this, sometimes we, you might forget, like, how many rows have I done? Is it time to switch to the ruched panel or back to the flat panel? So here we have our first row. You can see these posts, the posts of the first row of single crochets. And then the second row, until we crochet into them, they're kind of scrunched down, so they're a little bit harder to see. But there they are, and they will become stretched out as we do our third row. But I just wanted you to be able to see that. I'll point that out again when we get to our 5th row. So now what you're going to do is just do a total of 5 rows of single crochet. So we've done 2, now we go ahead and do 3 more. And remember, you just start that by doing a chain 1, turning your work, and then just going right into that first stitch with your single crochet and work all the way to the end. And it's probably a good idea in the beginning, especially if you're new to crochet, if you're a beginner, to just count your stitches as you go, just to make sure that you're not missing one somewhere along the way, especially at the beginning or the end, because that's usually where they would be missing from if they are missing. So I'll meet you when you have 5 rows completed. So I just finished my 5th row, and let's take a look at this too, so that you'll be able to recognize it in your own work. So let's count them together. We have row 1, 2, 3, 4. Those rows are really easy to see, those posts. But then we have our 5th row. It's kind of still kind of squished down. There's the posts there. So even though this could fool you into thinking, like if these were pushed down even a little further, you might think I only have 4 rows here. 1, 2, 3, 4, but we have 5 here. There's the 5th row. Okay, so you always want to open up your work a little bit to see if you're trying to count how many rows you're on. And I count the rows by the posts. Okay, so let's begin the next row, which is an increase row, or we're going to start our ruching panel, or our gathered panel. Okay, so what we're going to do is, just like in the other row, we're going to chain 1 and turn our work. And what we're going to be doing in this first row of the ruching panel is, if you made this in Tunisian crochet, you'll see that the strategy is the same. On the first stitch, we're just going to make a single crochet. On all the other stitches, except for the last stitch, we're going to put 2 single crochets into each of these stitches. So at the end, we will have a total of, since we have 25 stitches all together, we're going to have 25 minus 2, which is 23. 23 is going to be doubled, so that's going to be 46, plus add back in the 2 end stitches. 46 plus 2 is 48. Okay, so let's just start that. The first stitch is just going to be a single crochet. And then in every stitch afterwards, except for the last stitch, we're going to do 2 single crochets. So we're going to go into that stitch, do a single crochet, and then go back into that same stitch and do a second one. And then on the next stitch we do the same thing, 1 single crochet, 2 single crochet. So just do that all the way to the end, and when you get to the last stitch, which remember it's if you look at the top, you look for the very last stitch that has these V's. That's sometimes it can be tightened up. Just make sure you don't miss that. In that last one, you're just going to do 1 stitch. And if you want to count them, and if you're doing the same number that I'm doing, you'll have 48 stitches. So the first ruched row is completed. This is what it looks like. It you can see the beginning of the ripple effects starting to take effect. So for row 2 of the ruched panel, we're going to chain 1 and turn our work. And then what we're going to do is just work into every single stitch, all of the 48 stitches, with a single crochet all the way across to the end. And what you're going to do is just continue to work these rows until you have 5 rows completed in the ruched panel. And similar to the rows below, for being able to check where you're at, you can see that these are the singles because the posts line up pretty much on top of each other. And then when you get to the first ruched row, you have extra stitches. So that's our first row. You can see it. This is our second row with these posts. So do a total of 5 rows, so that'll be 4 more, and I'll meet you at the end of that. So I just finished my 5th row of the ruched panel, and let's just take a look at it together to double check how we count it. If we look at the flat panel, all of the posts line up underneath each other, and we can see where our ruched panel starts because the stitches double up. We have some stitches that don't have anything that go underneath them, so that means that's our first row. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then this row here that's kind of hiding, you can see the posts here if we kind of pull it up. So we have 5 rows of our ruched row, so we're ready to start another flat panel because this is worked in rows of 5. So we're going to chain 1, and we're going to turn our work, and we're going to do the opposite of what we did before. The first and the last stitch are going to be the same as always, so we're going to do a single crochet in there. But on these other stitches, we're going to decrease them all back down together. So for every 2 stitches, we're going to do 1 stitch, which means we're going to do what's called a single crochet 2 together. So I'm going to show you how we do that. It's really, really easy, and I think it's kind of fun actually. So we'll just do a single crochet in that first stitch. Now in the next 2 stitches, that's this one and this one, we're going to go into the first one like we're doing a single crochet. We yarn over and pull up a loop. We have 2 loops on our hook. Now instead of yarning over and pulling through those 2 loops, because we're doing 2 together, we go right away into the next stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop, and now we have 3 loops on our hook. Now we're going to yarn over and pull through all 3 loops, and that has just decreased these 2 stitches into 1 stitch. So let's see that again. We go into the first stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, go into the second stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, and then yarn over, pull through all 3 loops on our hook. So I actually like this row. I love being able to decrease because I know that the next rows are going to be easier because they're going to be shorter. And this row goes by really fast. So just go ahead and do that all the way to the end. So I'm at the last 3 stitches. I just did these 2 together. Now I have 1, 2, 3 stitches left. And you should also gonna single crochet these 2 together. And then in the very last stitch, you can see that V, it got just a little bit distorted, but it's there. Go under those last 2 threads, last stitch, and do just 1 single crochet. And if you count your stitches, you should be back to whatever your original count was. In my case, that's 25. And now what we're going to do is just do 4 more rows of single crochet the same way. So you're just going to do chain 1, turn your work, single crochet right into that first stitch, and every stitch thereafter. And these stitches may be a little bit elongated, and that's okay. Don't worry about that at all. As you're working your rows, they will kind of tighten back up. So I will meet you at the end when you've done 4 of these rows. And remember, you're going to be watching for where you went from twice as many stitches or posts into this less posts, the 25. And you should have 4 of those rows, and don't forget to count this row that is kind of condensed here. So I just finished my 5th row, and if we count them, you can see this is the last double row here. And so if we count them, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and then this row that becomes that's compacted until you work into the next one. So what you're going to do now is you are just going to keep alternating between flat rows and ruched rows, and when your piece is as long as you want it to be, you will just chain 1, and you'll cut your yarn and then pull the yarn through, and then your scarf will be completed. At that point, you can either do some sort of edging, or you can just wear it, and it will look like this. When it's completed. And so I hope that you liked this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up to let me know, and helps me a lot. I appreciate it. Also, be sure to subscribe, and if you have time, please, when you do make yours, post a picture of it and then put a link to that wherever you've posted it in the comments below, so that we can all kind of check out what you've done. The pattern will be over at Ravelry, so you can share your pictures there, or you can share them in my crochet Facebook group. I'll have a link to that below, or on Instagram with the hashtag Ruched Scarf. And thank you so much for joining us. Look forward to seeing you next week with next week's pattern. And thanks again.